Happy Halloween, everybody. This is Tommy the Game Master, and welcome to my channel. Well, it's Halloween, and I haven't looked at a Castlevania game in a while, so why not complete the Lords of Shadow trilogy with Lords of Shadow 2? This failed attempt at a rebooted Castlevania series ends on a game that actually was better than I expected. Don't get me wrong, it has to deal with the fact by this point its narrative is a hot mess, and a lot of Castlevania fans were disenfranchised by this point, including me. But it's actually got a halfway decent, even if it's a bit more basic narrative than the last game. And its gameplay is pretty solid, it's just not great. Let's take a look at Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. If you didn't see my reviews I did on the original game and the story, then I suggest checking them out. I thought it was okay, but they jumped the shark towards the end. Or I should say more like Evel Knieveled a whole bunch of sharks at the end of that game. We found out that Gabriel Belmont, the hero of the last game, became Dracula, and at the end of said first game, the year was 2057, so the ending happened 1,000 years after the first one's main story. And we did get a portable game called Mirror of Fate that did get an HD release on consoles, and that explains some of the story in between. It was still a lot of shark jumping. For example, Trevor Belmont and Alucard are the same freaking person in the storyline. So how do they conclude it? Well, better than I thought they would. Anyways, the game starts off in about the 1400s during the parallel time of Castlevania 3, with the Brotherhood of Light attacking Dracula's castle because he has resurrected himself, even though he doesn't really want to be alive. Anyways, after taking care of them in their massive mech suit that would make a Gundam pilot cringe, as well as spouting out Symphony of the Night memes.
What is a man? But a miserable pile of secrets.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
Oh yeah, for those who are disappointed that Konami is sticking to the PSP script as the official dub of the game, should be happy to know that all those classic memes still live on in this game. Anyways, after the battle we see Dracula being confronted by Alucard, and then the game gives us the entire backstory for those who might have missed any of the previous installments or just fell asleep when they got too long and too convoluted. Anyways, when we finally get to 2057, we find out that humans have built a giant city on top of Dracula's old castle, and Zobek is still alive, and now scared to death that Satan's acolytes are out to bring their master back, and when he does come back, he's gonna be pissed at the two of them over what happened 1,000 years ago. Dracula reluctantly agrees to help Zobek, when Zobek promises him he has his original vampire killer, a weapon that might actually end his suffering once and for all. From then on, for the most part, it's typical video game storytelling. The basic plot is Dracula has to find 3 of Satan's acolytes and kill them before they fulfill their plan to bring him back. The good parts, though, actually happen when this plot is interrupted as Gabriel's fractured mind brings him back into this dream world of the past, back when his castle, well, was still his castle and not some giant city, where he is confronted with his regrets of never really knowing his son Trevor Belmont as a kid, haunted by his wife Maria, as well as his many other sins he committed as Dracula. I like these parts, actually, not only because the set pieces feel like a freaking Castlevania game, but it does give us a bit more on what's going on in Dracula's head. A criticism of classic Castlevania games is Dracula had no character development. One of my criticisms of Lords of Shadow is they tried, but they failed when they made him too sympathetic. Dracula still needs to be the villain after all. The only reason we want to root for him in this game is he's literally the lesser of 3 evils when you compare him to Satan and Zobek. It took the Netflix series to get him right as a person who doesn't need to be stopped because he's a powerful vampire, but he needs to be stopped because he's lost everything important to him and now just wants the world to completely stop, quite literally, and is intent at doing just that to the point where his own son sees it as a necessity to put him down. Anyways, the criticism of him being too sympathetic still holds true here, but they did it in a way that didn't completely piss me off. Basically, these flashbacks are happening because Dracula is tied to his castle, and his castle wants him back, and wants him to stay there, even though it's obvious that the part of him that is Gabriel would like to go someplace else. So between the castle and the parts of him that are still human and still remembers everything about being human, it's a fascinating tug of war and some decent narrative. Again, it's put together in a bit of convoluted fashion because things Gabriel acquires in the dream world somehow manage to make it back to reality. And you find yourself switching to find these items quite frequently. But aside from that, it's a typical game plot. If you played a game with this story structure, you know there's going to be a twist towards that last alkalite. There's going to be a fight with Zobek, who is your guide and support team. And then finally, the final boss opens up. I've seen this several hundred times, and it's no different here. To be fair, the twist on who betrays who and why is different than most games with this story structure, and it's obvious for most of us who played through the first game, these two do legitimately hate each other, so the fact that they end up at each other's throats is not all that surprising. That said, I wish they gave Zobek more to do. In a lot of ways, he was the main character in the first game. Yes, Gabriel was the protagonist, but Zobek was the main character in the original Lords of Shadow. He narrated each stage entrance and a lot of the cutscenes. He also had the greater character art. Granted, it was straight down from humble man and concerned friend to twisted manipulator and villain, but he did have that arc. Here he says typical dialogue for a person who has this role in a video game. Your next mission will lead you here to this area to stop A from happening and defeat thing B. Then come back to me for a little more dialogue in your next mission. And it's just such a shame considering you have Sir Patrick Stewart doing the guy's voice. In the first game, they made good use of his skills. Not so much this time. Anyways, I have babbled on about the story long enough. Let's get on to the gameplay. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty much similar to the first Lords of Shadow with a few new changes. The biggest change that comes is rather than pick your own stage that the original Lords of Shadow had, you have a new open world environment to explore, as Castlevania City now has 4 districts for Dracula to explore. Unfortunately, while I like the idea of opening up the world quite a bit, after all, the most famous Castlevania games are in the Metroid format. Unfortunately, here it doesn't come off as good. Basically, it's for the most part, find the place in the map and go to it. There are some secrets to find to power Dracula up that need some backtracking, but this is a Metroid by the books only type of game, and it kind of makes it a mediocre experience. Not a terrible one, it's just kind of meh. That said, the game's combat from the last one is here and does add a few new refinements. Dracula's main weapon is still a whip that acts a lot like the last game. There are a few abilities that Dracula can't use that Gabriel could in the last game, but for the most part, the whip works just like it did last time. What they changed is the magic system, and for the most part, it's for the better. Light magic is now the Void Sword, which still heals you when you hit an enemy with it, but it opens up new abilities that can freeze enemies. Then there's the Chaos Gauntlets, let you throw fireballs and wreak havoc with double your attack power. And both of these can come in handy not only in combat, but also solving some puzzles as well. Again, doing combos with whips will give you the orbs that let you use the 2 magical weapons, so switching back and forth becomes a necessity. Overall, I did enjoy the game's combat system. What I didn't enjoy are these stealth puzzles that pop up from time to time where you have to avoid these huge tank-like demons that can kill you if you're caught. Basically, it's usually distract with bats or try to go around them as a rat. These areas are oftentimes as frustrating as they are boring. And screw this part where you have to throw daggers around to get this knight to the switch. That was just one of the worst puzzles I've had to endure in a video game. Despite my gripes about the stealth and the few puzzles you do encounter, there are thankfully a lot less here than there were in the last one, and for that I am grateful. The last game puzzles were all over the place and just killed the flow of the game. That doesn't happen in this one, and I was able to get invested in it easier, and I just enjoyed myself more not having to stop to solve these things as often. The character models and graphics are a bit better in this game than they were in the first, but the set pieces, not so much. I might have complained that I would have liked to see more of the inside of the vampire castle and to have that area look a bit more like classic Castlevania in the original Lords of Shadow games, but it did make up for it with forests and ancient cities and a hellish wasteland. But here, all we get is Dracula's castle and then a city with areas that all look too familiar that are just getting trashed by Satan's minions. The graphics and the settings aren't as bad as, say, Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate, but they're close when it comes to everything looks the same and just mediocre as heck. I was glad to escape into the dream world where we do get a little bit more variety in the different castle settings, but I can't say the game looks good. It's not bad looking, but it just doesn't look good as everything's just kind of the same gray area without a lot of color. It's such a shame when you consider just how good and colorful the previous game was. None of the music is memorable. Nothing like the classic Castlevania games of yore. But we do get some really good voiceover work from all the crew. Again, Sir Patrick Stewart always gives a good voice performance, and it's the same here, even if there's not much for him to do. But we also get a lot of great work from the people who do Gabriel's voice, from Trevor/Alucard's voice. Just, it's good all the way around, and some solid performances in the acting department.
Here for very good reason. Satan has specifically chosen this place for his return. He means to enslave you first, to humiliate you for what you did to him.
If you can find this game for less than $10, then it's worth a pickup. It doesn't have some of the highs that the original Lords of Shadows did, but it avoids all the valleys that it had too. Castlevania City is interesting enough to explore, to not be completely bored, but it's not exciting either with everything looking the same. In the end, this is the best Mercury Steam Castlevania game, but I can list a bunch of games in the original series that I liked better. Castlevania could have ended on a worse note, but I think it could have also ended on a better note too. At least us diehard fans still have the Netflix series, and from the sounds of it, it will probably be getting a season 3 if what some of the actors say is true.